Hello everyone and welcome back for another edition of the Money Pros. I'm Oliver Tutt, certified financial planner practitioner, and I'll be your host for the next half hour as we talk about all the issues related to your money, how to make it, how to keep it, and hopefully how to help it grow. Let's jump right in and talk about what we're going to cover on today's show. First up, interesting article that I saw recently ranking states the highest to lowest percentage of millionaires. So I thought it would be fun to go through the top 3 states, take a look at the states that have the largest percentage of millionaires in the state, talk about some of the reasons for that, who the wealthiest person is, and we can talk about where Massachusetts and Rhode Island falls and all that as well. So we'll talk about that in our first segment. Our second segment, we have our real estate pros back. We have from Keller Williams Realty, Chad Kritzas and Sam Alpern, and we're going to be talking about really a continuation of our last show with these guys, which was the trials and tribulations if you decide to go for sale by owner. We had so much material in the last show that we didn't cover it all, so we want to have these guys back to talk about all that, and that's what we're going to do. Third segment, we're going to be talking about shifting gears a little bit, talking about long-term care insurance. This may not be a type of coverage you're familiar with. If you are, you may be following the fact that this coverage is getting more and more expensive, and some are questioning if it's even going to exist in a few years. So we're going to talk about some of the dynamics driving the long-term care insurance market. So we've got a lot to get to in today's show. Let's jump right in, and let's talk about states with the highest percentage of millionaires. So interesting statistic, and this was based on an article that I saw in Kiplinger's, and nationwide, only 5.8% of households meet the mark of a millionaire. Now, Kiplinger's has a particular way of defining what a millionaire is, and it's a little more exclusive than you might imagine. They calculate it as a net worth in the household of $1 million or more, but excluding your real estate of your personal residence, as well as your retirement plan. So when you take those things out of the equation, that is going to shrink the list of millionaires, and that's the way Kiplinger's in particular looked at it. And then they broke it down by state to not just look at what states had the most millionaires in them, because that would be the usual suspects, California, Florida, New York, but what the highest percentage of millionaires was relative to the rest of the state. So I wanted to share those with you, and we'll talk about each one of them a little bit individually. So let's throw up the slide. And first up at number 3, our next door neighbors in Connecticut, 7.75% of the state of Connecticut qualified millionaires based on Kiplinger's definition. 1.3 million households in Connecticut, and 107,000 of them are millionaires. So that is the highest percentage. The Stamford metro area, which is immediately outside New York, the New York metro area, and has a very high percentage of hedge fund and investing businesses, and then the people that run them living in the Stamford metro area, is the highest concentration of millionaires in the entire United States, the Stamford metro area. And the richest person in Connecticut, of course, is a hedge fund manager, Ray Dalio, and he is worth $17.4 billion with a B dollars. So he is the richest guy in Connecticut and one of the richest people in the country. Number 2, another neighbor of New York City, probably not a big surprise, 7.86% of the households in New Jersey qualified millionaire status. 3.3 million households, 259,000 of them qualify as millionaires. New Jersey, a state noted for its high taxes and cost of living. Maybe you have to be a millionaire to live there, I don't know, but it certainly isn't discouraging them from living there. And then the wealthiest resident in the state of New Jersey, another hedge fund millionaire, investor John Overdeck, is worth $5.5 billion. So that's number 2. And number 1, this may come as a little bit of a surprise, came as a surprise to me. Maryland, 7.87% of the state qualify as millionaires, 2.26 million households and 178,000 millionaire households, concentrated primarily in the D.C. metro area, but also the eastern shore along the Chesapeake. The wealthiest person in the state of Maryland is the owner of the Washington Nationals, Ted Lerner, worth $5.1 billion. And so if you're curious where our neighbors to the north are, Massachusetts was actually number 6, so just out of the top 5, 7.4% millionaires. And Rhode Island not as far down as you might have guessed. Only number 16 on the list of millionaires with 6.22% of the states. So that is a breakdown of the millionaires. And up next, we're going to be talking real estate with the folks from Keller Williams Realty. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Money Pros, joined now by our real estate pros, Chad Kritzas and Sam Alpern from Keller Williams Realty. And this is really a part two of a conversation that we started several weeks back on the challenges you might experience if you decide to go in a for sale by owner situation. And this would obviously apply mostly to those that might be considering selling a property themselves. But it also could relate if you're dealing with another party in a for sale by owner situation. It can create a number of challenges. So we want to continue that conversation because we actually never finished it. Before we do that, and we always do this with Chad when we have him on, we got to get the market update. And I pay attention kind of out of the corner of my eye to what's going on in real estate, and mostly locally, because that's what people care about. Seems like it was a heck of a summer, but what can you tell us about where the market's at right now?
It was a heck of a summer, just like we've been talking about. Spring was probably the best I've seen in a long time. Summer was fantastic, and what people always forget is the fall market always stays very busy too, which I think we'll touch on a little bit. But we have been talking periodically about the market starting to slow down just a titch. And I think the first thing to note was really it's the amount of inventory is what defines a buyer's and a seller's market. So we started the year at 2.7 months of inventory. And inventory relates to if no other homes hit the market, how many months would it take to sell the homes for sale? So we started the year at 2.7 months of inventory, which is a very strong seller's market. At the time we're filming this in October, we're at 4.4 months. So the market really is starting to balance a little bit. We're seeing less of that demand that we saw in the spring, and it was reflected really in the single-family home sales. The prices are up 5.9% over last year, but the number of sales are down 3.3%. The condo market stayed pretty even, and then the multifamily market, on the other hand, sales were up 23% and prices up 13%. So we are seeing much more of a balance kind of that we've been talking about all summer. And I think we're starting to see it now as we kind of head into the fall and winter months. And
that interesting statistic, we won't spend too much time on this because we want to get to the for sale by owner stuff, but one of the things you just mentioned, the increase in price. You talked about condos up 13%. I think you said single families. Okay, and then single families up 5.9%. That's significant price appreciation in residential real estate year over year. So the asset itself is performing very well from an investment standpoint.
For looking back, though, historically, you say if the prices are going up 5.9% and the sales rates are going down 3.3%, it's starting to balance out a little bit. So I'm not saying it's not 2008, the sky's not falling.
Okay,
but we
good to know.
Good to know. But we are seeing a little bit of a balancing, and I think it's really important that people are aware of that, because we go on so many appointments where people are, well, you know, in the spring my neighbor's house sold for X, or, you know, and I think it's really important, like your market, like any other market, they fluctuate. So you really got to watch, you know, if the sales are starting to diminish a little bit and prices are going up, there's got to be a checks and balance there a little bit.
And it also must stratify significantly in the range of prices of the homes, from starter homes to multi-million-dollar homes and things like that. So it's important to talk to an agent about exactly where you stand depending on the time of year and things like that, which I think is probably a good jump off into how we want to pick up this conversation with respect to for sale by owner. And one of the challenges that, you know, I always think about, if I were to sell my home, I want to do it in the spring.
Right, of course.
When do you time the sale of your home? Sam, let me ask you, how do you advise somebody on that, and where can somebody potentially go wrong that wouldn't know better?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the spring market. Typically, sellers are always thinking that the spring market is a lot stronger. Typically, there's a lot more buyers out there. But we have to keep in mind that the fall time, winter time, the buyers that are out there, they're much more serious, if at worst just as serious as the spring market. The biggest thing as a seller is to keep in mind that in the springtime, you know, everybody's waiting for flowers to bloom, grass to be green. But if you're thinking the spring market's better, Chad's thinking the spring market is better, my neighbors down the street are thinking the spring market is better, there's just a lot more inventory.
Right.
With the influx of inventory means a lot more competition. As a seller, you want to try to mitigate that as much as possible, minimize that as much as possible. If I can't, you know, if I'm looking to get into a neighborhood as a buyer, if I can only look at your house, I'm either buying your house or I'm not. if I'm looking in the springtime, I might have 3, 4, 5, 6 other options to choose from.
Are there particular types of property where you'd say, assuming it's up to the seller and they have some flexibility about when they put it on the market, because sometimes life situations dictate that, but certain properties where you'd say, yeah, this ideally would be a spring house, or this ideally would be fall, or to take advantage of its uniqueness, let's put this on in the winter. Do you think about those things?
One thing that we see a lot is really waterfront homes, those higher luxury homes that maybe need either a little bit of work, or it might just be something that a buyer wants to come in and make their own. If the seller is able to sell in the winter, the buyer is able to buy in the winter, they then have that 4, 5, 6 month period to do their renovations. That way they're in there to really enjoy the warmer months.
In season,
yeah,
right.
Those waterfront homes, especially in Rhode Island. Being able to sell them in the winter, it's much more appealing for a buyer. And that's why I mentioned a lot of the buyers that are looking in the colder months, they're much more serious.
Another thing that I'm curious about, and my experience in looking at houses has been, it's gone from the paper and from circulars. I can't even read it anymore. I clearly need glasses. My wife would be the first one to tell me that. But I don't even think about print publications anymore. It's all about going online. How important has the ability to put your house online in a good light become in selling a property?
Well, and you just said it yourself, the days, I hate to say it, but the days of newspaper marketing are over, right? You're not going to say you're going to Florida to buy your second home. You're not going to get off a plane and find a newspaper and then go find a house, right?
Or one of those circulars, right? Where you always flip through on vacation. Yep.
Sellers love to see their homes and those things, but the buyers aren't looking at those. Like everybody else, right? If I'm looking for a home in a neighborhood, I'm driving through and I say, how much is that house? I'm automatically just going on my phone and checking it. So it's the online presence really is what drives the buyers to certain homes. And that's professional photography, strong web placement. And that's, I think a lot of the for sale by owners say, well, I'll stick it on the for sale by owner site. Is your average buyer driving down the street going on a for sale by owner site, or are they going to the major search engine, right? They're going to the major search engines, and I won't use those names but we write those companies large checks to make sure our listings go to the top. So that's where I think from an online perspective there's a big differential, because if they're not on those big sites, then who's going to see it, right? If you put up a for sale sign on the end of your cul-de-sac, who's driving by that sign? So it's the online marketing really that drives the buyers to our listings.
To echo what you just said, I think about, and I'm continually looking for real estate in my town, because my wife and I think about downsizing from time to time. And when we want to be aware of what's for sale, we go to RI Living. I'll say the website. I don't know if you're ready to check it out, but I go to RI Living and I put in my price range and I just scroll through. If that house isn't listed in multiple listing service, it's not going to show up if it's a for sale by owner. I'm not even going to know, right? So unless I drove by and saw the sign in the front yard, I wouldn't even be aware of it.
And Rhode Island Living is actually a direct feed from MLS. So that's the consumer side of MLS. So that's a great site to use because everything is real-time information.
And I think about how important those pictures, the detailed description, and just the mere fact that it appears there. If it doesn't appear there, it doesn't show up on my radar. Once you get, this is where things get scary for me. Once you get a buyer, if you're the seller, once you get a buyer, how important, Sam, is the role of negotiating the sale of the real estate? Because if you've got a great property, if it's in a high visibility location, you could get lucky, right? You could find the buyer, but that's the end of the beginning. There's a whole other stage that's starting there. How important is having experience in real estate negotiations to get the deal closed, fairly, legally, in every respect?
Well, I mean, it's huge. It's the biggest part. You want to make sure that you're able to maximize on your investment. And while a lot of sellers, they may have sold 1, 2, 3, 4 homes in their lifetime, maybe with a realtor, maybe without. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that you might be giving away valuable information without even realizing. The biggest question that I ask whenever I'm looking at a for sale by owner, I try to be a little bit discreet with it, but I'll make sure at some point during the showing that I'm asking, they're listed at $400,000. I'm asking, hypothetically, my buyer wants to put an offer in. Is something, $375. Would that be strong? And they say, I think we'd give that pretty good consideration. That sounds pretty good to us. I just got your price down $25,000 with one question. My top offer now is going to be $375. I'm not going anywhere close to $400 for my buyer. So, like I said, a lot of valuable information. That's just one example, but a lot of things can be given freely without even realizing.
The other thing that worries me, and we talked about getting things done legally. One of the things I noticed with my agent when we've looked at properties is one of the first things she takes a look at is the disclosures.
Of course.
I don't even think about it. And she'll be flipping through them like, what are you reading? Disclosures. And she's told me some horror stories about problems with disclosures. How important are the disclosures for the buyer and the seller? And how can you get in trouble if you don't know what you're doing with the listing?
Great question. So there's a couple of different disclosures, like the lead disclosure, for instance, right? 1978, that's kind of the date. But even a home that's newer than that, new construction, everything requires lead disclosures. Everything does. And even if you have no knowledge, you just check no knowledge. The sale disclosure form is required in 90% of the sales. It's not required in foreclosures or estate sales because they never live there. But if you put something as a seller on your disclosure form, right, if you know something's wrong, you need to tell the buyer. That's the way, the vehicle in which you deliver that information.
And you're obligated to, you have a legal obligation.
Absolutely.
You can't just know the foundation is cracking all over the place and keep your mouth shut about it, right?
Right.
So you have to reveal those things.
Right. As a seller, do you know where to find those documents, or do you know they're required? Some people do, but most of the time we show up, they have no idea what I'm talking about.
How important do you find is knowing the agent that you're dealing with when you're looking at a house or negotiating a deal?
Well, we were driving on the way here to see you today, and one of the agents that I do tons of deals with called and just asked about a house that we had taken off the market, and just wanted to have an honest conversation. And I knew, he's a very successful, very good agent. If he's calling to have that conversation, then he's a guy that I want to take the time and have that conversation with, because he's going to produce a ready, willing, and able buyer.
So once again, we have failed to cover everything that we wanted to cover in our short amount of time, but we definitely revealed a lot more of the issues that can come up with for sale by owner. I don't think anybody's saying definitely don't do it,
no.
But you have to consider a lot of things that maybe people aren't just aware of, so I'm glad you're here to talk with us about that stuff. Right up next, we're going to be shifting gears and talking about long-term care insurance. Stay with us, there's more to come. Welcome back to the Money Pros. I want to take a look now at what the future of the long-term care insurance market is. If you're somebody that's looking at retirement or in retirement, this is the type of coverage that you probably have considered whether or not you actually took it out or not. The long-term care insurance market is going through a lot of trials and tribulations, and I wanted to talk about some of that. This summer, Genworth, which is the longest writer of LTC policies in the country, received approval from regulators in 22 different states to raise premiums. It's important to recognize with long-term care insurance, it's not like term life insurance where you buy it and you're guaranteed a premium for 10, 15, 20 years. Long-term care insurance rates can go up if the insurance regulators in your state approve the increase. It's kind of like utility bills like gas or electric. Genworth has raised premiums 28% in each of the last 2 years, and they claim to have lost nearly $3 billion on their older long-term care insurance policies for which they are raising these premiums, or going to states and saying, hey, we have to raise these premiums on our insureds. John Hancock, another large long-term care insurance writer at one time, stopped writing policies entirely last year. And Prudential, another giant insurance company, left the market altogether in 2012. So the number of carriers that are writing this coverage is shrinking rapidly, and the cost of this coverage is going up quickly. What is going on with long-term care insurance? Let's throw up a slide. We'll take a look quickly at each of these issues. The first thing is a low interest rate environment. Insurance companies make their money on the float, not unlike banks. You pay premiums, it goes into their general fund, and what they really profit on, for the most part, is the difference between what they put in and what they paid out, and then they tack on the interest. In a low interest rate environment, they're not making as much money. Number two, policyholders are living longer. This is a big challenge with long-term care insurance, because instead, when they thought they were only going to have to pay benefits for maybe 1 or 2 years, people are living longer. They are more likely to demand long-term care services or require long-term care services. And then when they do require those services, they're requiring them for a longer period of time. And then finally, and this is the big one we're going to talk about in a little bit of detail, is poor actuarial data. So let's talk about this one. The long-term care insurance market is a relatively immature market when compared to auto, homeowners insurance, or certainly life insurance. It lacks the actuarial data that insurance companies depend on to accurately price these policies. When the products were first developed, and I'm going to say that was essentially in the 1970s when modern long-term care insurance came out, and somebody may want to correct me on that, but insurance companies didn't have great information on how many people were going to require coverage, how expensive was that coverage going to be, how long were they going to be in a nursing home, all of those things. So they basically had to make guesses, and insurance companies don't like to make guesses. They like to know exactly what the data is going to tell them. So like on life insurance, they have very good information about mortality rates. With long-term care insurance, they don't have nearly as good information. So what does this mean for retirees who are facing long-term care costs potentially in retirement? And it could blow up your retirement with an extended stay in a nursing home. You have a few choices. If you have long-term care insurance, you can accept rate changes and or modify and drop coverages. So you can look at adjusting coverages, dropping coverages, and this is something I see my clients facing frequently. They purchased long-term care insurance several years ago. Now they're having to go back and revisit it, drop benefits, modify coverages, daily benefits, and things like that. You can skip buying long-term care insurance altogether. I am not recommending it nearly as often as I used to. Very, very limited scenarios where I'm recommending traditional long-term care. And then the final option, and this may be the thing that happens going forward in the industry, are hybrid life insurance long-term care policies that provide both a death benefit and a minimal long-term care benefit. But the jury is still out on those. So, a lot of turmoil in that industry. Pay close attention if you're a potential investor. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Look up the Money Pros and you can post a question there or message us. You can go to foxprovidence.com and you can click on Ask the Pros and ask us a question there. And finally, you can send me an email, moneypros@foxprovidence.com. We answer all of our questions, even if we don't answer them on the air. But the really good ones, we like to answer on the air. So please send us a question. We'd love to be able to help you out. That's it for today's show, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next Sunday right here on the Money Pros. Have a great weekend.